Oh, great. It's time for another one of these episodes. You ready? I don't think he's ready. Hello everyone, welcome to The Worldview. My name is Aaron Chandler Blake, and today I'm replying to comments from Tartarian theorists because apparently they didn't get the hint from the last time I did this. If you're new to the channel, allow me to quickly give you a bit of context on what's going on here. So for almost a year now, I've been working on a series called Debunking Tartaria. I've done 4 main videos for this so far, 1 comment reply video and quite a few shorts videos on the subject. And these videos have received mixed reactions, shall we say, from Tartarian theorists. Despite these comments though, I am going to finish my Debunking Tartaria series and I'm going to continue making Tartaria debunks beyond that in the future too. Obviously, I have several hours worth of content about Tartaria now, and to save everyone a bit of time, here's a quick rundown on what I've featured so far in my Debunking Tartaria series. First of all, in part 1 of the series, we studied the origins of the Tartarian theory through the likes of Anatoly Fomenko, looked at the history of the true Tartarian people, explained why old world maps featured a fictional Tartarian Empire, and demonstrated how conspiracy influences have stolen tropes from popular works of fiction to make the Tartarian theory sound more interesting. Then in part 2, we completely debunked the idea of a mudflood using geology. We also used the process of street level raising to explain buried floors of buildings, cast doubt on the possibility of liquefaction warfare, did a case study on the Alaskan boneyard, and questioned the Great Reset narrative. Then in part 3, we debunked the concept of Tartarian architecture. We did this by doing a ton of case studies on places like the Saigon Governor's Palace and the Great Wall of China. We proved we could build wonders in the old times, we explained how they built wonders in the old times, we proved we can still build wonders today, and then shed light on the true history of the World's Fairs. And then most recently, in part 4, I explained how early photography worked to give context on why there were no people in these old photographs. Then I debunked the Vanilla Skies myth by looking at the mechanisms of early cameras. Then I looked at the idea of Tartarian airships. I did this by first looking at the history of aviation. And finally, I linked all of this together to demonstrate why Tartarian airships did not exist, and also highlighted the lack of proof to support the idea that they were real. A lot of the comments that you will be seeing today come from these 4 videos, and I will leave the link to those videos in the description. And for the first time, I will be including some comments I received on Facebook and even a little bit of hate mail. I don't know why I sounded so excited about that. So with that in mind, I am once again referring to the funny hat in the hope that it will take the edge off. So with all that in mind, let's get going. Alright, let's see what well-articulated, thought-provoking, intellectual comment will get us started today. Life Lessons Learn says you're wrong. Alright, that was clearly my fault. Obviously I set the bar too high. Let's move on, shall we? Okay, next comment. This one comes all the way back from part 1 in my Debunking Tartaria series. Let's see what it says. To be fair, you're taking the position that history can't be faked, which is blatantly untrue. Pope Donum II never existed and the Vatican admits it now, for example. In fact, you could slice 3 dozen popes from the lists, but you would lose 200 to 300 years of time, and that would leave vast gulfs of missing time. Obviously that alone would be difficult to reconcile for Catholic records which are used in nominal chronology. Well, I mean, at least you can use the right yaw, that's a good start. School history books will teach you things like James Cook was the first man to discover Australia. They'll teach you the Wright brothers invented flight, and they'll teach you that your country were the good guys in every war they ever fought. With exception to Germany anyway. But teaching kids things that aren't strictly true is a big problem. Because when those kids grow up and realise what they were taught isn't true, it gives them the ammunition they need to distrust history. Then social media conspiracy theorists who peddle things like Tartaria will capitalise on this distrust for their own monetary gain. But Pope Donum II was a cataloguing record that came from misreading historical records. It wasn't an intentional fabrication. Conventional history isn't established purely from nominal chronology either, and records are usually cross-referenced with other historical documents to form a consensus. Plus, many civilizations from around the world have extensive historical records that are completely independent from the Vatican, such as ancient Korea, ancient Japan, and ancient China. But history is open about the fact it has some uncertainties or unanswered questions. These unanswered questions, though, are not the same as hundreds of years worth of history being completely made up, and it certainly doesn't mean that there is anywhere near 300 years worth of universal gaps in recorded world history. I feel like this comment relates to the Phantom Time hypothesis and Otto III of the Holy Roman Empire, and that's interesting because that's actually going to be a topic that I cover in part 6 of my Debunking Tartaria series, so make sure you stick around if you want to see that. Okay, next comment. This one's quite long, so strap in. Dude, anything east of Rome was Tartars, west was Barbars. It's on 1800s maps. There's a small region in Russia called Tartar and they carry the Griffin flag, the same flag listed as Tartarian in history books. There's photos of Tartarians, you baby man. What? Whatever. Alright, lock in. Their guard dress is red tunics with big black bear hats. They're dark skinned, they look like Papua New Guineans. They're the indigenous of that region. In fact, it's why the Queen's Guard uses their uniform, because they were the fiercest army the UK ever met and they honour it. The 500 to 1500s are not the Dark Ages, they were dark skinned. Our faction white-eyed Jesus up and deleted all Tibet to Tartaria peoples, took their treasure and razed their cities to the ground, because that's what they did back then. They're doing it now in the West Bank, militarised Catholics, and they're about to scare you with asteroids and ETs into thinking the Pope's the world's only religion. Dude, you don't know enough about history to debunking anything clearly. Holy yap, that was long. So a guy who thinks everything that was east of Rome was Tartaria is telling other people they don't know anything about history. Interesting. If everything east of Rome was Tartaria, then we would have to completely ignore several historic societies, civilizations and empires, such as, but not limited to, Persia, Mesopotamia, Greece, ancient India, the Moguls, the Mongols, Angkorian society, the Burmese Empire, the Sassanids, the Khanate of Kokand, the Khanate of Sibir, the Golden Horde, the Rorans, the Song Dynasty, the Ngalip people, the Han Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, the Yuan Dynasty, and many more. But sure, it was all Tartaria, wasn't it? Also, the Queen's Guard started wearing black bear hats after the British victory over Napoleon's Grenadiers at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. It has nothing to do with the Tartar people, who by the way I never denied the existence of and openly addressed in my first video. Plus, in that first video I talk about the Republic of Tatarstan, which you reference, and explain why the existence of the Tartar ethnic people is not equatable to the existence of the Tartarian Empire. In fact, the Republic of Tatarstan actually still exists today in the Volga-Ural region of Russia. Bet you didn't know that. But the continued existence of the Tartarian ethnic group alone is not proof that there was a Tartarian Empire. The same way that there being people from Huddersfield doesn't prove that there is a long-forgotten Huddersfield Empire that's been wiped from history. However, that's a conspiracy I would really get behind, so if anyone wants to pick that up, please let me know. As for the maps, these are easily explained by any amount of research that doesn't involve TikTok. Tartar became a popular term in Europe thanks to the Mongol army's westward invasions. In these invasions, the Mongols were wrongly identified as Tartars because people from the Tartar ethnicity made up a large number of Genghis Khan's frontline warriors. This is because Genghis Khan defeated the Tartar Confederation in 1202 and absorbed a lot of their strongest warriors into his army. Tartar was then used as a blanket term by European cartographers such as Abraham Ortelius, who, by the way, never actually travelled to the Far East. This meant a lot of their maps from the Far East are based off of word of mouth from missionaries and traders, as well as older maps made by older cartographers who also never went there. Also, Marco Polo's diaries were used as a reference by a lot of these cartographers, but by the time Abraham Ortelius drew this, Marco Polo's diary was almost 300 years old. And if you think using 300-year-old source material to create a map won't be a problem, then feel free to plan your next European trip using a map that was drawn in 1726. Plus, Mongols didn't actually start self-identifying as Mongol until decades after Genghis Khan had died, which is another reason the term Tartar became so prevalent in Europe. Next, maps of the Far East show the size of Tartaria decreasing as European understanding of the region increased, proving it wasn't a real empire but a vague placeholder term for a region that Europeans had limited knowledge of. Once their knowledge improved, the placeholder term was no longer needed, which is why Tartaria started to disappear. Other vague blanket terms for scarcely understood regions can be seen on other maps drawn by the same cartographers, proving that this was a common practice. Also, there is not a single map on Earth that shows the Tartarian Empire as a global civilization, or depicting it in any place besides the Far East. Finally, if the British Empire did want to erase the Tartarians from history, then why would they start wearing their colours to honour them? Also, referring to the period between 500 and 1500 as the Dark Ages is pretty outdated, and I don't think anyone has done that seriously since about the 1960s. The reason the Victorians called them the Dark Ages is because they didn't know much about what happened then, but since we've developed our historical understanding of the era since, we no longer need to call it the Dark Ages, so stop doing it. Also, you're claiming that Tibetan people and the Tartarian people were deleted, even though Tibetan people and Tartarian people still exist. Honestly, people's ability to just make stuff up and be so confident about something that is so very obviously wrong will never cease to amaze me. Alright, let's move on to the next comment. This one came from my Debunking Tartaria architecture video, and thankfully this comment is about architecture, so at least it's on topic. So, let's see what they said. Did your ancestors build any of these buildings? Do you personally know anyone descended from the architects and the builders of the cathedrals like Bath Abbey with personal stories handed down by mouth through families about what the construction was like to be part of? Oh my god, do people not know what a full stop is anymore? Because there should be thousands of such stories based on the amount of grand buildings around in Gothic, Neoclassical and a few other styles. I don't know anyone with that family history though. First of all, I find it kind of funny that you tried to list a load of architectural styles, got to 2 and then realised you couldn't know anymore, so you just said and a few other styles. Nice. Also, something that seems to have been overlooked here is the fact that abbeys and cathedrals are not the same thing. A cathedral is the church that contains the official seat for the bishop of that district. Meanwhile, an abbey is effectively a giant church with far less direct regional pastoral authority. Just because a church is big, it doesn't by default mean it's a cathedral. But to answer your comment, I've never been to Sudan. I don't know anyone from Sudan. I don't know anyone who's been to Sudan. So by your logic, that must mean Sudan doesn't exist. I'm sure you're not lying when you say you don't know any personal stories like this, but you need to understand that your own personal experiences alone are not a fair representation of a much bigger picture. This comment also doesn't really seem to understand how oral history works, and they're setting a standard that historians don't actually use. Historians generally won't look for the descendant of a medieval stonemason in the hope that a family story might have survived. Instead, they will look for contemporary pieces of written evidence because they are generally much more reliable. Just to clarify, this isn't me saying that oral history can't be trusted, but written history tends to be more reliable as it is less vulnerable to being manipulated over time. Also, a lot of oral history tends to include hyperbolic or personified details which make it difficult to translate or take literally. An example of this, which I included in my last comment reply video, was the story of the Moai on Easter Island walking up the hill. When explorers first went to Easter Island, they asked natives how the Moai got there, and the locals said that they walked. Europeans dismissed this because obviously stones can't walk, and the mystery persisted for years. But then we realised by walked they meant that they stood them upright and rocked them back and forth up the hill using ropes. But despite what this comment insinuates, there are still a lot of societies and cultures around the world beyond the Western Hemisphere that continue to uphold an orated history. For example, the Kyrgyz people still have orators who recite the Epic of Manas, which is a story that dates back to at least the 8th century. Then, in West Africa, people called griots hold hereditary positions and have the responsibility of remembering and orally explaining the details of their history. Ethnicities that still use griots to this day include Mandinka, Fula, Mossi and the Hausa people. Anyway, let's get back to Bath Abbey itself, which is built on the site of an older Norman church from 1499 to 1617. This comment completely ignores the fact that we have contemporary records of the construction of this building which give us the names of the people who were involved. For example, Robert and William Virtue were master masons who worked on both Bath Abbey and King's College Chapel. Using historical records like wills, church contracts and business documents, we've been able to reconstruct their lives and careers. We also have physical evidence left by the workers themselves thanks to masons' marks. These marks were often left so masons could prove they did the work they were hired for and receive payment. York Minster still has original masons marks which have been traced back to specific stonemasons from the 12th century. The same masons marks have also been seen at other churches in the York area, showing that stonemasons travelled to different places to complete work. But the idea that these historical records can be discounted or discredited in any way because there's a limited amount of oral history to go with them is an absolutely ridiculous sentiment. This comment also seems to assume that there is no passing down of knowledge from the construction of these mega churches, abbeys and cathedrals we see all over the UK and the rest of the world, which simply isn't true. York Minster has been constantly added to, repaired and renovated for the best part of 800 years, and many techniques used by stonemasons today are traditional techniques which have been passed down through generations of craftsmen. Which proves that we actually do have orated history and the passing down of knowledge, unlike what this comment insinuates. And using the commenter's logic, where are all of the orated stories of the Tartarian Empire? Why did our grandparents never mention them? Why are there no orated stories of the Tartarians building Tartarian architecture? Why are there no orated family stories of people flying in Tartarian airships? Why are you asking conventional history to provide evidence that Tartarian theorists cannot provide themselves? Okay, I probably went into way too much detail on that one, but it's important to cover all areas because I know if I don't, I'm going to comment saying, yeah, but you didn't mention this. So I've just got into the habit of like covering all areas and covering all the ground now to avoid that. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, bad news, this comment is also from my architecture video. Good news is much shorter, so let's see what it says. Show me how the logistics on these buildings were built using horse and buggies. Lol, what a joke. Well, if you were paying attention, you would know that I explained this multiple times in the video you commented on. For example, you've probably seen a lot of Tartarian posts citing hammers and chisels or horses and donkeys as the equipment our ancestors used to construct these buildings. But saying we built things like Westminster Abbey with hammers and chisels is like saying we built stealth bombers with spanners and screwdrivers. They had cranes, pulley systems, levers, non-electric mechanisms and more which allowed them to lift heavy objects into place. The idea that we couldn't have lifted these heavy construction blocks into place with the equipment we had available at the time is complete and utter nonsense. It has been debunked so many times by so many different people. I'm actually baffled that people still give this part of the conspiracy airtime and think it's going to prove anything. Theorists suggest that even getting the materials to these construction sites, let alone actually using them to build these monuments, would have been impossible. And they cite a lack of infrastructure, particularly roads, as proof of this. Let's take the United States in the 1800s as a case study to prove why this is not true. Heavy building materials were usually transported along dirt roads using specially built wagons that were pulled by teams of horses or oxen. These wagons were called Conestoga wagons, which are not to be confused with the much smaller prairie wagons, and they could carry up to 5 short tons at a time. Their curved beds stopped loads from shifting, and the large wheels and horse-drawn power meant they could easily navigate through roads even if they became muddy after heavy rainfall. However, heavier loads were transported using railways or river barges where possible, such as the Granite Railway, which opened in 1826 and was used to build a number of large monuments in the United States, such as Boston Customs House. So there were no airships needed, there was no ancient technology that's been hidden from us that was needed, there was no Tartarian Empire needed. Our ancestors managed to build these amazing monuments just fine without all of them. I get comments like this all the time from people like, oh yeah, you mentioned this thing that's in the video, but what about this other thing that's also in the video that I didn't pay attention to? Just listen, or at least watch the whole video before you comment. Because when you do stuff like this, it makes you look like an idiot. Save yourself the humiliation and watch the video before you comment. Okay, this next one is quite exciting because it's the first time anyone has ever DM'd me hate mail. Wait, that's not a good thing. Anyway, I received this message on Facebook, so make sure you go give me a follow there if you're one of the poor souls that still uses it. In his first message, he wrote, "Do you get your information from Wikipedia? ? You're incredibly biased and misinformed. If you want to be successful on YouTube as a truth seeker, you need to do better research. Look up My Lunch Break and take notes. Just stick to sports, bro. Clearly you know nothing about history or science other than what you regurgitate from Wikipedia and Google. I just want to point out, by the way, before I respond to that, the guy who sent me these messages, according to his profile, is 29 years old. You are a grown man and this is what you do in your spare time. Well, the fact he sent this to me 2 days before Christmas is just an extra layer of hilarity to me. Like, do you not have anything better to do during your holidays than hate mail people on Facebook? But I must admit I love the irony of a Tartarian theorist calling other people misinformed. But yes, everyone except you is biased, good job. And wow, look at all of these Wikipedia articles I've been referencing for my videos. Plus in my architecture video, which I had published by the time I received these messages, I called out James W. Lee for blatantly copy and pasting Wikipedia into his Tartaria book. Now for those of you who don't know, James W. Lee is a leading Tartarian theorist thanks to his book, The One World Tartarians, which was published in 2020. In this book he claims that the World's Fairs are evidence of the Tartarian Empire, and he spends 13 pages listing every single World's Fair that happened from 1790 to 1930. But James, we need to have a word about this. This is the first page of Appendix 2 in the One World Tartarians. If you look closely, you'll see these numbers in brackets at the end of each entry. What do they represent, I hear you ask? Well, interestingly, these numbers have the exact same formatting as the citation references on Wikipedia. But that's just a massive coincidence, right? Wrong. It turns out these numbers correlate exactly with the citations on a Wikipedia article titled List of World's Fairs. Just to clarify, leading Tartarian theorist James W. Lee copy and pasted Wikipedia directly into his book while claiming other people are intentionally misleading you. So please, tell me again who needs to do better research. And this whole internet bad narrative that these people spin is so stupid, considering that if it wasn't for the internet you wouldn't know what the Tartarian theory is anyway. Like, you cannot accuse people of believing lies on the internet while you personally buy into a lie that has been circulated and popularized by the internet. Also, the category of content I make is generally referred to as debunking, not truth-seeking. Perhaps you should stop acting like an expert on YouTube if you don't know what the difference is. But you did name drop my lunch break, so obviously your idea on what qualifies as good content is pretty warped. I put all of this in a message back, and I also told him that I was going to include him in my next comment reply video, so I hope you're watching, buddy. But this is what he had to say in response. You haven't debunked anything though, and easy content for your 200 followers. Go ahead and embarrass yourself some more, clown. You're a joke, dude. Get a real job, your content is trash. Along with your worldview, ha ha ha. Seriously, go read a book and quit getting all your information from Google. Damn, did I touch a nerve with that reply? You seem very touchy. First of all, I have 700 followers, not 200. So he dropped Wikipedia because I called him out for it, and now he's still obsessed with Google because it's the only search engine he's heard of. If you don't like Google, which is completely valid by the way, I'm not a big fan of tax-dodging transnational corporations either, there are plenty of other search engines that you can use instead. But to say that every single thing on Google can't be trusted is ridiculous, considering that the internet is effectively an accumulation of everything humanity has ever learned. So if you look at every single piece of evidence that has ever been digitalized from all areas of human history and you don't trust it, then that is your problem. But the fact you came into my DMs 2 days before Christmas with the intention of rage baiting me, then immediately got emotional when I sent you one message in response is pretty hilarious. But if you want to deny blatant, provable and objective facts because they go against the narrative that's been spoon-fed to you by social media grifters that financially benefit from your ignorance, then go ahead. It's not my problem and I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Also, for the record, I do have a real job. I work in a university in China and I've probably written more books than you've read. Once again, I replied and put all of that in a message, and he replied with, "Get the F out of here. You couldn't write a book if your life depended on it. Keep smoking crack in your crummy little apartment." This is going to be a long video, isn't it? Alright, time for another Facebook one. Public comment this time though. He said, "You're uninformed in anything other than brainwashed from school. Learn history from people of the countries." By the way, this comment was on my shorts video about the Great Wall of China. As I mentioned just now, I live in China, and on top of that I have been to the Great Wall. So who's the armchair fan now? If I need to learn history from the people of the countries, then I'm pretty sure I've done that, considering I've been living abroad for almost 2 years now and have travelled to about 18 countries. Also, notice how it's people that can't spell or use proper grammar that always complain about education brainwashing people. Funny that. Okay, this is our last comment from Facebook today, and it's taken from the same video as the last one. It says, "You're an idiot. Seriously, you're a full-blown idiot. The guard towers face China." That's just not true. We'll come back to that in a sec. So if you're going to build a wall and you're going to have places on the wall from which to fire arrows, why would you have them pointed towards China? They don't face towards China. Why do you all keep saying this? Dude, you really need to take another look around at the world around you. What? Wait, did I read that wrong? Dude, you really need to take another look around at the world around you. Huh? Bro, you look like a moron. What? Sorry, you wrote that sentence and immediately after you were going to call me a moron. The gall of these people. As for the guard towers on the Great Wall of China facing the wrong way, that is blatantly untrue, and I mention it in the video he commented on. First of all, there are two main reasons as to why we have battlements on the southern side of the Great Wall. The Great Wall of China was built in sections over several generations, meaning there were gaps along the border. If they didn't have battlements on the southern side, it meant armies could round the wall and have free reign to attack from the inside. The second reason is these battlements allowed the Chinese to attack retreating armies as they tried to flee the area. Then there's this argument about the gates. The gates on the northern side allowed the Chinese to send scouts into the northern territories, and it also allowed them to launch counterattacks against invading armies. But I question everything's logic, Hadrian's Wall in the UK must have been built by the Picts instead of the Romans, as that too has gates on the north side. So the guard towers on the Great Wall of China are in fact north facing, as are the majority of the battlements. The defences facing the northern side are also visibly taller than the ones facing the southern side. That is because the Great Wall of China was built by the Chinese to defend against northern powers, not the other way around like Tartarian theorists say. And I would like to add, you would know this if you'd been here. I'd pay 20 quid for this bottle of water. Rip off. Man, I'm hungry. Lunch break after this one, I think. Okay, next comment. Let's see what it says. Appreciate hearing the other side of the story. It is refreshing. However, there are still perplexing issues being brought up in videos like this one. How did they heat those gigantic buildings? Would like to hear your version. Thanks. First of all, it is nice to read a comment that isn't derogatory or insulting. That is a refreshing change of tune. So the video linked in this comment talks about the heating of old buildings. The main argument is that in a lot of old pictures we can't see chimney smoke, which to them is evidence that chimneys and fireplaces were not meant for practical use. He also argues the amount of wood we would need to fuel these fires, especially in the UK, would require huge stockpiles or huge amounts of deforestation that we do not have records for. Finally, he questions how effective wood fires would have actually been at keeping these buildings warm, and comes to the conclusion that these buildings were instead heated by free Tartarian energy, and that fireplaces were later added to cover this up. In the video, he claims the photo which inspired him to make this content was of a large city hall that was taken in January 1887. But boilers were introduced to the UK in 1868, which might explain why the photo he references that was taken 20 years later doesn't include chimney smoke. Boilers were also very expensive when they were first introduced, which meant only large buildings, such as city halls, could afford them. Then we have the claim about wood, which is easily debunked as most fireplaces in the UK run on coal as well as wood, and the coal mining industry of the UK is incredibly well documented and continued to exist even into the 21st century. Coal also produces more heat than wood, which not only explains why it was used, but also explains how it managed to keep these buildings warm. This video also claims that fireplaces were decorative and didn't have a practical use. Just because something is ornate, it doesn't mean it lacks practicality. Ferraris are designed to be eye-catching. Does that mean we are meant to drive them? Plus, we have hundreds of old photos that do include chimney smoke that for some reason this other creator chose to ignore. And finally, if chimneys weren't attached to a fireplace, then why were they added to buildings? What was their purpose? To be honest, this video just seems like a great example of false cause. Like the original creator saw a picture that didn't have chimney smoke in it, and his immediate thought is that is proof of a hyper-advanced ancient civilization that had access to free energy and airships. How is that your first thought? Also, it's amazing how the world elite managed to fit adding fake fireplaces to every building on Earth into their already busy schedule of wiping out all the Tartarian people, manually altering every single photo ever taken, destroying and repurposing every Tartarian building, rewriting all of history, clearing all the mud from the mud flood, rounding up all the Tartarian airships and hiding all the Tartarian technology. And again, this just highlights the fact that pointing out an issue in conventional history is not the same as proving the entire record is fake, especially when that issue is based off of poor research and false assumptions. Okay, that was a nice change. There was some actual debunking going on there instead of just replying to meme people, so hopefully the next one follows that. How about several countries of experience? You sit in the West educated by slop and tell everyone in the world they are wrong. Just fuck off back to your hole. As already mentioned, I live in China, and once again we have a great example of someone who has no evidence to support their opinion, so they've fallen back on insults because they have no impulse control and are incapable of having an objective discussion. Like, this comment doesn't actually prove anything. It just shows that you can't actually justify your opinion while having the audacity to insinuate that everyone else is brainwashed. Alright, moving on. Our next comment says, Genghis Khan, he was a Tartar. There was an empire that was ruled by Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. At one time, his empire was huge. It was most of Asia and India. Is that the Tartarian Empire? I don't know, but it's history fact. Genghis Khan was the leader of a large empire, the Mongol Empire. He was also Borjigin, not Tartar. Meanwhile, Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty, not the Mongol Empire, and neither of them conquered India. Like, this is what I mean when I say Tartarian theorists argue against straw men. Like, your entire argument is structured around a version of history that is just not true. Like, the reason you think history is suspicious and doesn't add up is because the version of history you've been taught by social media is wrong. If people like this actually put effort into improving their historical understanding by reading books or doing self-study, instead of attending the University of TikTok, then they wouldn't believe in Tartaria anyway, because once you know literally anything about history, it becomes very obvious that this entire conspiracy is incredibly stupid. Okay, another comment. Hopefully this one doesn't make me want to put my face through a wall, but I'm not holding my breath. Your naysayers can't explain the star forts of America or the old world buildings. Okay, that's it. I'm taking a bath with my toaster. The video before the one you are commenting on is almost entirely dedicated to these topics, and I mentioned that less than 2 minutes into the video you are commenting on. Finally, in part 3, we debunked the concept of Tartarian architecture. We did this by doing a ton of case studies on places like the Saigon Governor's Palace and the Great Wall of China. We proved we could build wonders in the old times. We explained how they built wonders in the old times. We proved we can still build wonders today, and then shed light on the true history of the World's Fairs. The reason I mention this so early into my video is because I wanted to test a hypothesis. I noticed that a lot of the comments I was getting, especially the negative ones, were completely missing the point of the video. And I was starting to ask myself, like, did you even watch the video before you commented? So I put this 2 minutes into the video, and wow, look at all of these comments from people that quite obviously did not watch the video before they left the comment. To be fair, I didn't go into much detail on Tartarian architecture in the video he actually commented on, but I did make it clear that I have explained Tartarian architecture and these old world buildings, so for him to insinuate that I can't explain them is ridiculous. So either you didn't watch the video before you commented, or you did watch the video and everything I said just went straight over your head. I mentioned my 1 hour architecture video to him in my reply, and someone completely different responded saying, "But you can't in one sentence explain it here." Yes, of course, let me boil down my entire 1 hour video into a single sentence for you. It would be impossible for me to condense such a complex subject into a single sentence. I'm sure you're fully aware of this, and I think I know why you wanted me to do it. I don't think this is going to come as a big shock to anyone, but you wanted me to condense and oversimplify my discussion into a single sentence so you could turn it into a straw man. But the irony is, I actually responded to this person in several other comments with the information they were looking for, and in the time it took them to leave 20 comments on my video, they probably could have watched my architecture piece and found the answers for themselves anyway. Okay, this next comment isn't in response to something I said about Tartaria, but it was left under a video which I made about someone who is a key Tartarian theorist, so I thought I would include it. A few months ago, I made a video where I called out Cultivate Elevate for his false claims that radium is actually good for your health. I won't play any clips from that video now, but if you want to watch it, I will leave the link in the description. Anyway, this video got the response, I use all of his tactics and the doctors say I'm almost perfect. If it's unhealthy, why am I gaining health and not losing it? The radium girls are also heavily lied to about, and these are lots of... What? Did I read that wrong, or is it... it's just whatever. The radium girls are also heavily lied to about, and these are lots of propaganda on the story. Honestly, it hurts my brain reading half of these comments because the grammar's so bad. For context, I cited the radium girls in my video to demonstrate why radium is bad for your health. And this guy is right when he says there was a lot of propaganda and misinformation regarding the radium girls, but not from the side of the argument that he's insinuating. In fact, the United States Radium Corporation lied about the negative health impacts of radium and covered up medical evidence that proved it. For example, in 1924 they filed a fake report to the US Labor Department to hide the findings for medical examinations regarding exposure to radium. They also hired company doctors who withheld diagnosis information from the radium girls' families, and some radium girls even testified to this in court while they were suffering from their terminal illnesses. It's insane that people like this call themselves truth seekers, yet when it suits them, they completely ignore a truth that has blatantly been covered up by the establishment. As for your health, I'm glad to hear that. But I follow none of his advice and I'm also in great health, so obviously his advice isn't the difference maker. Plus there are other people in the comments of my videos about him who say that they bought his product and they didn't help. Which again highlights my point from earlier that your own personal experiences alone are not a fair representation of a much bigger picture. Okay, let's have one more and then I think we'll have to wrap it up for today. So same video, different person. Let's see what they said. So you should be apologising for not spreading the fact that even humans radiate energy. Good luck figuring that common sense out, smooth brain. For the record, I never denied the fact that humans radiate energy. I didn't mention it in the video because it's not relevant. Arguing that radiation isn't bad for people because humans radiate energy is like saying people can't drown because our body is 60% water. But what I find strangest about this comment is the fact that apparently I should have to apologise for that, but you don't have to apologise for the fact that in one of your other comments you told me to get cancer. This just shows the mentality of these people. They claim to be free thinkers and enlightened truth seekers, but as soon as you question their beliefs, they send you vile, disgusting stuff like this. To anyone watching this right now who is on the fence of Cultivate Elevate, I just want to ask yourself, are these really the sort of people you want to be associated with? Because if I caught one of my followers saying that about Cultivate Elevate, I would kick them out in a heartbeat. So to any Cultivate Elevate followers who are still watching at this point, prove to me that you are mature enough to hold each other to account. And if you cannot do that, then you have absolutely no right to come on the internet and paint yourself as a voice of reason. That was a bit of a sour note to end the video on, but unfortunately that is all we have time for today. Like I said, I've received so many comments over the last few months that I couldn't possibly fit them all into one video. So I'm going to be making another video next week where I get onto the other comments I didn't get a chance to look at today. Hi, Future Aaron here to say that I actually won't be releasing that video next week because I'm currently on holiday in Kyrgyzstan. I didn't get a chance to finish it before I left. So I guess that one will be with you in like 2 or 3 weeks maybe. But as I did in my last comment reply video, we've looked at the things Tartarian theorists have said in response to me, but I want to take a moment now to talk about the things they have not said in response to me. First of all, in my architecture video, I pointed out that allegedly Tartarian buildings such as Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney are built using construction techniques that were popularised in the 19th century, like the Flemish bond and lime mortar. If these buildings really are ancient and found like you claim, then why are they built using 19th century construction techniques? And if we can't replicate these buildings today like you claim, then how are we able to use the same building techniques? Next, Tartarian theorists like to argue that a lot of the old buildings we see today are much older than we're led to believe and are in fact Tartarian. They could easily prove this idea by providing a picture of these buildings that predates their construction date according to conventional history, yet no one has ever done this. I wonder why. Plus, I have mentioned this 3 times now, but no one seems interested in talking about it. But if our historical timeline has been fiddled with or had huge chunks of history added or deleted, then why do the Babylonian astronomical diaries still line up with our current astronomical projections? That would not happen if centuries worth of time had been added or deleted. Finally, by the end of the 19th century, industrialized countries documented almost everything, and we still have most of these documents today. So where are the Tartarian documents? Big tech leaves big, long, boring paper trails like metallurgical records, patents, business ledgers, supply chains, transitional prototypes, and more. Yet none of these things exist to support the idea of a Tartarian Empire, and for some reason absolutely no one is interested in asking themselves why. If your argument is that the world elite hid or destroyed all of these records, then please explain to me how the world elite failed in eliminating publicly accessible maps which show Tartaria, and even failed in removing the people of the Tartarian ethnicity itself, yet were 100% effective when tracking down and eliminating every single scrap of private sector paperwork from a globe-spanning industrialized empire. And also your proof being a lack of proof is ridiculously flawed logic for hopefully obvious reasons. But if any of my comment replies today have offended you in any way, then please feel free to remind yourself who's been sworn at repeatedly and told to get cancer. But if you're watching this now and you're one of those people that just wants to write a comment full of abuse and insults, go ahead, make my day. Because at the end of it all you're going to do is prove my point throughout this video that you lack the emotional maturity needed to have an objective grown-up discussion. Plus, I can include your comment in my next comment reply video, so it's more content for me. But once again, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate the support, and if you've made it this far into the video, I feel like I've more than earned a like and a subscribe. Like I said just now, I've made a sequel to this video where I reply to the rest of the comments, and I'll be uploading that next week. So hopefully I'll see you then.